Hi, I'm Jeff Maas, CEO of Retirement Security Centers. I'm very excited for today's guest on this session. We've known each other for a long time, so let's jump right in. Today, I'll be interviewing Briggs Matsko, who is a certified financial planner and a chartered retirement planning counselor. He has 47 years of experience in our industry, and we've worked together for 18 years as co-founders of Retirement Security Centers. Briggs has always been on the cutting edge of all things retirement and now has semi-retired himself while also remaining in a consulting capacity to RSC. So today should be really insightful. Briggs, as you know, we believe retirement is the single most important financial decision one will make during their lifetime. What advice would you give to someone who is looking for the right firm to partner with?
Well, Jeff, before I answer that question, let's get started just by saying thanks for the nice introduction. It was just how I wrote it for you. No, just kidding. Anyway, back to the right firm. So, I think there's a lot of things to think about when picking a firm. There's so many firms out there. How do you decide? Well, some of the things that I would suggest is that maybe you visit their offices, right? See whether just actually physically go there. Do some due diligence. There are ways to make sure that they don't have any violations, SEC or FINRA violations or anything like that. How long have they been in the business? In your community, not just how long have they been in business, but how long have they had an office in your community? Are they a registered investment advisory firm, or are they just a broker dealer, or are they both? Those are some things that you might want to think about. How many advisors do they have? And what's the average tenure? If you can get that information, that's always helpful to know how long their advisors have been around. Do they have open architecture, for instance, or are they just have products that they can only sell because they work for a manufacturer of products? Do they sell proprietary products? And if so, do their planners have a quota? A lot of the wirehouses have quotas to sell. Their advisors have quotas that they have to meet. So, and then do they have a service team to help service the business? In other words, if the advisor's not in, is there someone that can help them if they have questions, change of address, And then what are their hours? I think that's important as well.
Yeah, all great stuff. So we've talked about this a little bit in other videos we've done around what we call FINRA, FINRA, broker check. And FINRA is our regulatory body. And a lot of people don't know this, but you can go on to, if you just Google FINRA broker check, you can type in your advisor or your prospective firm's name and get full history on them to include how long they've been in the business, what licenses, designations they have, what states they're licensed in, their disciplinary history. Hopefully that looks really, really good. Maybe there's one over a 10-year period, something like that. Anything more than that, it's kind of a red flag that you should be looking for another advisor at least. So as we talk about moving from looking for a firm and some of those things that you just mentioned, how about as we go down to selecting the right advisor? You feel like you've done some due diligence, you like the firm, now you're meeting with an advisor. What should you be looking for there?
Well, just like with firms, there's a lot of advisors out there, a lot of different personalities. I think probably the first and most important thing is, will they agree to a discovery meeting? Will they agree to meet with you just for a discovery interview to get to know each other? Do they require a minimum amount of assets? Do you have to have a minimum amount of assets to work with you? That's important to know. Are they credentialed? Do they have a CFP, and are they a certified financial planner or other credentials? How long have they been in the business? Just like you check a firm, you should check for the individual broker as well. Do they have any violations with SEC or with FINRA? And you can do that on the broker check that you mentioned, website that you mentioned earlier. What's their financial planning process, right? Do they have a process? How do they go about it? How often can you expect a review if you engage with them? How often will they review your account? Do they have a personal administrative team? In other words, do they have someone that's going to take requests if they're not in? What are their hours? Are they available only 8 to 5, or are they available all the time? Will they give you their cell phone number? Do they have an office, or do they work out of their home? How are they paid? That's a really important one. Are they paid by commissions, by fees, or both? Um, and I guess after you spend some time with them, really the big important thing is the chemistry right? Do they listen to you, right? Are they asking you questions? Or are they making statements? So I think that's really important. So at the end of the interview, the discovery process, do you feel good about the chemistry?
Yeah, all great stuff. So let's say that, I'll give you an example, right? I had to have an electrician come out to my house recently. And so what did I do to figure that out? Well, I talked to some family and friends that had recently used an electrician, or maybe I went online, maybe I went on to Yelp, something like that to get a little background vetting. How did you answer the question over your long career? How did you answer the question when a client said to you, this all sounds great, but do you have any references? Is there anybody that I can talk to? How did you handle that?
Sure, I would be happy to give references. Obviously there's privacy issues around people's financial information, but we always kept a list of people that they could call, be referred to, and so yeah, I think it's important to have those references and for people to reach out.
Yeah, so you'd probably agree it's a red flag if the advisor said, "No, I don't really have any current clients that you can talk to. You can talk to my spouse. They'll tell you that I'm a
Or
good person."
or you get the I'm sorry, this information is all private. We couldn't give you anybody's name. You can have people talk to people. They don't necessarily have to disclose their personal information. Just
Yeah,
their experience, right?
yeah, I think that's a great point. I relate back to clients that we work with. It's like going to a great restaurant or seeing a phenomenal movie. You can't help but tell people about it. And so, as an experienced advisor, you should have some raving fans in your client base that say, I would love to be an advocate for you. And yes, it doesn't mean that we're going to disclose their personal information or anything like that, but certainly having a list of clients that would be willing to just help out a prospective potential client is something important. So, yeah, thanks for that insight.
Yeah, all good points, Jeff. I agree with you 100%. There's a lot to it before you get started because it's basically a trust business, right? And you have to have, and as I said, that chemistry has to be right.
Yeah, definitely. So, we believe in creating a vision for your retirement before you just jump right in cold turkey to retirement. Can you think of a client example about somebody or a client along the way, or maybe a friend where they just didn't have that, and how you helped them during your career around that and the impact that it made?
Geez, that's a great question. As you know, having worked with me for many, many years, we have a lot of different client stories. And let me think. The one that comes to mind first is a good friend of mine that I hadn't seen for 40 years that engaged me as a planner. And He had retired from the military. He and his wife had retired from the military. And so they were doing all right. They had a substantial amount of savings. And this was kind of a different situation. They were not spending enough money, and meaning that they were kind of still looking for sales and bargains and afraid to take a vacation and fly anything but economy. And so when we did the analysis for them, they figured out that they could spend more money. So that's one thing that it's really about life planning, isn't it? It's around asking the right questions, not necessarily all about finances, but more about what are your dreams and goals and what is it you like to do, and understanding what they want to do, uh, what exciting things they're doing in retirement, or what they want to do in retirement, what they have planned out.
Yeah, that's great. So it's always fun, when sometimes we'll bring on a new client and we ask a lot of questions, right? We have to gather a lot of data to be able to deliver appropriate recommendations to them. But it's always fun when we get to the point where we're delivering their financial situation, what it looks like. And there's always just that unsure uneasiness about, I think we're okay, but I'd really appreciate a professional looking at this that's retired thousands of people guiding me along the way. And so it's fun in those meetings where we can say to them, you can do that. You can donate more to charity. You can help the kids with the down payment on a house. You can buy the car, all of those type of things. So as you think about that, it's something that we relate back to called the investment policy statement. Can you just talk about that with us?
Yeah, it's interesting when we talk to people. One of the questions that we ask them is, have you thought about, if you look at retirement, how you're going to categorize your expenses and link them to your income sources and assets? Most people kind of give you a little bit of a blank look. Um, and so we talk a little bit about that, but we also ask them what kind of rate of return do they need in their portfolio to make sure that they don't outlive their money? And do they have an investment policy statement? Most people really do not have an investment policy statement. We found that if they do, they maybe think of it, well, my financial professional or my broker or my financial planner got me X rate of return last year, and we're pretty happy with that. And they mistake that for an investment policy statement. An investment policy statement really projects out what kind of rate of return they're going to need based on a certain amount of assumptions over the years, and how are they going to effectively measure that. And so that's really important, and people generally have an epiphany after we work with them.
Yeah, that's very true. A lot of people think, a financial advisor, we look at charts all day and we're analyzing investments, and certainly there is a component that we do of that, but there's a lot of just counselor that goes into it, and psychological guidance that we provide to people. So, one of the neat parts that I really enjoy about our job is we really get to know people on a personal level. And so I'm gonna, if you're okay with it, let's dive into Briggs's personal life a little bit, and talk about your what we call in the sandwich generation. And so that sandwich generation is difficult. And can you explain just a little bit about what that is, and what other people that would be in your same situation, the challenges that they would be facing?
Oh, sure. Sure. Well, Jeff, you know me well. You know that I have a 19-year-old son who's just entered college, and I also have a 91-year-old mother who lives with us. So I'm living that example, and there are certainly some challenges associated with that. Obviously, there are financial challenges. You have to pay attention to paying tuition and helping support a parent, and making sure that you're taking care of your family, your wife, and yourself as well. So all those things come into play, and it's important that you do the proper planning around that, and projecting expenses, and be prepared for the unexpected, right? And so that's one aspect of it. There's the emotional aspect. How do you divide your time? How much time do you have to give the mom? And is she ambulatory? Can you guys go away? Or do you have caregivers set up so that you can have some respite time and get away together on a vacation? Or if your son's in college, are you going to be able to go away and see him? And so how do you integrate all that? And so it's not just financial questions, it's really thinking it through, and emotionally, how are you going to handle it, and the psychology of it all, right? So sometimes retirement doesn't work out exactly as you planned. And so it's important to think about all those things. And when you're working with your planner, to make sure that they understand as well, and ask you the right questions. Do you have long-term care in the event that you need it? Have you thought about, you have college savings plan, right? Is that all funded? If not, how are you going to fund? How do you take care of it? And so there are a litany of questions that need to be asked in a good planning process.
Yeah, certainly. I mean, I think, those two things that we just brought up about the sandwich generation, right? Right now, there's a lot of news about inflation. And if you think about inflation is simply just the cost of something going up, right? More than everything else is going up. And if you think about those two items, specifically, healthcare, long-term care, assisted living facility, in-home care, et cetera, the cost of that has gone up at a much, much higher rate than everything else. And then also college has gone up at a much, much higher rate, right? So you've got these two kind of big unknown expenses, and feel for those people that are in the sandwich generation, because you've got financial challenges at both ends. But even if you're not in the sandwich generation, even if you've got just half a sandwich, right? it can still be really, really hard.
I like that half a sandwich. Hadn't thought about putting it that way, but being prepared. And actually, anything that you project out indefinitely in the future is going to be wrong. And so that's why it's important that you have to do a review periodically, at least annually, to make sure that your planner understands changes that have come about. Do you have to outfit your house so that you have someone with disability can get around? You have to change things in your home. Does your student need to live in a rental versus the dorm? What are the challenges associated with that? And so you really need to be, candid with your planner and be meeting with your planner periodically to review any lifestyle changes that might occur.
Yeah, I mean that's one of the things that we often hear. It's retirement. A lot of people think it's set it and forget it. Yeah, I maybe met with a financial planner or maybe I just did it myself. And yeah, I feel like before I made the decision to retire at 62 or whatever age it was, I looked at all that, and I don't really need to do that again, right? So can you talk about why that's so important? You touched on that a little bit, but just expand on that a little bit more.
Well, we just know that as life gets in the way, life happens, right? So you can make these assumptions as to rate of return or longevity or expense risk, those things that we talk about, how much you're going to have in expenses, but things change. Sometimes children move home after college, right? And they're there for a while, longer than you might expect. Maybe they need help with the down payment on a house. Maybe they need new clothes for a job interview. Who knows, right? They can't go in t-shirt and shorts most of the time. And then with regard to a parent, um, my mother's health has started to deteriorate, and so there's more trips to the doctor, and who's going to take her, and who gets the medications, and how are you taking care of all that? So those, all that changes. So longevity assumptions change, assumptions change, inflation changes. Right now we're in increasing inflation environment. So, when we're doing reviews, we really have to kind of take that into consideration, right? And then uh, did they earn what they thought they were going to earn on their investments? And so that changes from year to year. We can't make a promise that they're going to earn the same rate every year. So all that has to be reviewed.
Yeah, I definitely live it, as a student of finance. I certainly know the history, but I didn't quite make it into the decade of the 70s. And so, talk about what impact inflation, as an example, had, and what it did to a financial plan back there. Maybe you could use, parents or somebody like that as an example.
Sure. Actually, that's a great example. My father retired with a defined benefit plan from a large corporation, and he was a war veteran, so he had a little bit of a pension as well from the service. And when he retired, that all looked good, but there was no inflation adjustment, no COLA, no cost of a living adjustment for that. And he had Social Security, which did have a COLA, but when inflation is at 10%, 12%, like it was back in the late 70s, in fact, maybe you wouldn't remember this, but Gerald Ford had a button, a WIN button, WIN. It was whip inflation now. And so, inflation was a big problem. And so when you first retire, maybe your budget is fine. But when a postage stamp goes from 5 cents to 25 cents, or a gallon of gas goes from 39 cents to $1, which sounds cheap today, but that's, three times, and everything else is going up, which affects the cost of delivery of goods and you name it, right? And you don't feel it right away, but 5 years later you feel it, or maybe 10 years later you feel it. And if you aren't making adjustments along the way and thinking about that with an annual review and looking at what the cost of goods are and measuring the expense risk that you have, I can tell you, having just been retired a couple of years, that price of things have gone up. My electric bill's gone up, which I was because I'm home more, right? Running that air conditioner more. So all those things need to be taken into consideration.
Yeah, I think that's such a great point. I think one of the big things that we often find is, and this is something that we really help clients with, is spending the right amount in retirement. And oftentimes that doesn't happen in both directions. There are some people that are spending too much, and we have to lightly coach them that, you could do it now, but we can't do it for the next 25 years, and talk about different phases of retirement. There's also, like you talked about earlier with the case example that you gave, where we get to deliver that news that open up the purse strings a little bit, right? I know the hamburger at McDonald's is now $6 instead of 25 cents, like you remember it being back when you were a kid, but it's
15.
okay.
15.
15. But you can afford the $6 hamburger. It's okay, because a lot of times we see people that, again, they just kind of clutch the purse strings, right? And costs seem so high to them, and so they actually underspend in retirement, and they end up leaving this big inheritance to the kids that they really didn't need, and maybe that the kids, not that they didn't need it, but the kids would have said back to potentially mom and dad, we would have rather had you enjoy your retirement and do some of those things that you wanted to do, rather than leaving us a bunch of money.
Jeff, it's really a great point, and I just what I'm thinking about is it's important for people to be working with a planner that has a diagnostic process, right? It's not just selling products to solve problems, that they have a diagnostic process that solves for what are the 4 risks in retirement, in my opinion. Longevity, you know, uh, uh, that's important. Have you had any health situations that might change that longevity? Because you don't want to outlive your money. The second risk is those expense risks we talked about, inflation that we've talked about, and are you getting the rate of return? And not that you just solve each one of those individually, but simultaneously. So that's really important, that you do that diagnostic work each and every year.
Yeah, really, really powerful stuff. Important. So let's move to a couple last questions as we get close to wrapping up today. What is a common myth in our profession or field that you want to take a second to debunk for us?
Well, let's see. I think there are a few. Um, I think one common myth might be the thought of the old stockbroker that was buying and selling investments. Had the phone and was buy, sell. Today we're going to do this, and managing investments. And more so, the industry has gone to bringing best of breed to the financial planner. In other words, somebody else manages the investments, and we pick the best managers. And our job is to work with the client as a counselor, to ask questions, to not just promote investments or products, but more to work, as a counselor, and to work with their other financial professionals, like an accountant or an attorney, and have a team working together and coordinating that team. I think of the financial planner as really the quarterback of the team, helping the client with all of those things like taxes or estate planning or all that, and making sure that we're talking about life planning. That's really what's important.
Yeah, that's a great one. I mean, like I touched on earlier, we do spend a lot more time counseling and providing tremendous value in that area. Sometimes, especially right now, sometimes it's, you can retire. It's been a difficult year. Go ahead and make that decision. The financial box has been checked. We move over to more of the psychological and the life planning box. So that's really good. Great. Is there anything else, any other advice that you want to give our audience today?
Well, I think the most important thing is, if you don't have somebody you're working with, or if you haven't spent any time thinking about that, about retirement or about your financial planning, that you ought to get in motion. Do something. Get educated. There's a wealth of information that's out there on the internet. Also, if you're inclined to engage a financial planner, go through that discovery process we talked about. Pick the right firm, pick the right planner, find someone that you're comfortable with. They should really be focused on a process, not a product driven approach. You ought to buy this product because. It really ought to be more about, tell me more about yourselves and what you want to accomplish. And they ought to have a whole list of questions and be asking you questions about yourself and what your goals are, and even cause you to think a little bit, maybe, of things that you hadn't thought about. So asking the right questions are important too. And are they patient? That's very important.
Yeah, that's great. Yeah, great advice. Well, thanks, Briggs, for your time today. Hey, if anyone wanted to follow you online or connect with you, what's the best way to get a hold of you?
Well, as you know, Jeff, I'm still consulting back to the firm, so they can come through our firm's website, which is retirementsecuritycenters.com, or they can find me on LinkedIn at Briggs Matsko.
Well, great. And for everyone else, you can follow RSC, Retirement Security Centers. You can find us on LinkedIn and Facebook and Instagram and Twitter. And then, like Briggs said, you can also check us out on our website, which is defineyourfuture.com.